Only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's good to see all of you out there. I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of your microphones right now. But what I'd like you to do is mute it on your end. And then whenever you're called on, if you have a question, then unmute your mic and we will take that. We will take that question. So, hold on 1 second.
Yeah, well, Gabby.
All right. And I'm just walking through them here. It's good to see all of you back once again. This today. Oh, wait a minute.
Hey Warren, happy holidays.
And to you as well, Tim. How you doing?
Doing good.
Good. Good.
Waiting for the big snowstorm here today.
Well, we're getting the wind and the rain.
About 4 inches, I'm hearing.
Is that even considered a big snowstorm up there?
No, but it's the first one of the year here, so fun stuff, right?
Exactly.
Time to bust out the snowblower tonight, right?
I know. Yeah, David has that same problem, right?
Yeah, it's super sunny today, but it's freezing ass cold. It's like 40 degrees out, 45.
What kind of information would you want displayed in this section?
I wish I had a camera. I could show you what it looks like outside here. You can't even see out there. It's just clouds, fog, and coldness.
No, I was down on the boat earlier this morning hiding out with the Wi-Fi, working away.
To a separate website, or would you want this information to be within the app?
Do you have a space heater on that boat? Are you allowed to have them on there?
Yeah. I got a little heater, but it's funny because...
Yeah, so on your menu, there's at the bottom, there's one...
kind of an issue, and so between my battery charger from my computer and the little heater, you know, I run it for about an hour. But it's good. It's a comfy little hideout.
You need a generator in there.
It's not. It's funny that you should say that. Some of the bigger boats, or like we say, some of the rich people, you know, they've got quite a bit more stuff. But the problem there is, you know, once you get into that kind of whole world of big boats, then it's less sailing and more kind of yachty stuff, and that's just not me.
Right.
So,
no, you seem like you like to be with, you know, with your hands on everything.
Yeah, if I was going to have, my logic is if I was going to have engines and generators and all that, I'd have a big power boat, you know?
Right, exactly.
We call them stink pots.
The dinghies that they have out here, that's about what I would have.
Totally. Well, it looks like everybody's
Happy holidays. And
yeah,
hey, thanks for everything this year. You're the best. We appreciate it.
Well, happy holidays to you, Tim. I'm sorry about your Bears. They keep losing, but so do my Steelers, so it doesn't really matter.
Yep. Oh, yeah. No, it's not going to be... As long as Notre Dame puts up a good fight, I'm happy.
There you go. You just find a new team to root for. So welcome everybody. Warren has allowed me to share my screen. I'm assuming you're all looking at it. I'm going to show you what I got going here so that we can kind of get going on this project. I've experimented with a couple of different things in the past in terms of webinars, in terms of like how to start, you know, from the basics, not the basics, and it is a little bit challenging. I think this one is going to end up getting cut into a couple of different parts because of the complexity of it. And then the other thing about this one that's a little bit different is we're in the Android environment today instead of the normal iOS environment, and I did that because the post that triggered this webinar that I'm looking at right now on the forum, somebody weighed in, I can't remember for who, LA maybe? Yeah, so LA asked, hey, can you do this in Android maybe? And I thought, what the heck, let's do it in Android this time. So as usual, a lot of the concepts are not even really related to whether we're working in Android or whether we're working in iOS, but we're going to use the Android environment today. So reading this thread, this discussion started with the idea of, you know, how do I connect my app to a backend, basically, or a MySQL database or something like that. And so this was the original question, and we had a little back and forth, and then some comments here. And you know, Tim posted a great PDF here that Mark made, which is an awesome reference. I'm going to encourage everybody to look at that after we get done talking to kind of try this all together. And then Dusko posted a URL to a wonderful tutorial about connecting your Android app to a backend database. So there's all kinds of things, all kinds of resources we can draw on besides this. And then MacBoy said, you know, hey, can we look at a couple of different scenarios, like if the database on the back end changes often, Or if it doesn't change very often, you know, what do we do in those cases? So we're going to try to touch on this stuff, but it's definitely a lot of different topics. And so we'll just kind of start with the basics and go from there and see what happens. Today, are we 90 minutes today, Warren?
Yes, sir, we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're 90 minutes. So I'll start about, you know, I'll run for about 30 minutes or whatever. We'll take some questions and then we'll try to get through some useful stuff. One of the challenges with these, of course, is the longer we talk, the more questions we tend to have. And so we're going to have to try to kind of balance that idea, you know, between just answering literal questions and actually making some progress. So we'll start today, and then if we need to, you know, redo, you know, part 2, part 3, part 4, we can build on these concepts as much as we want. So let me show you what I've got going here. I've got Eclipse running, a really basic Android app with one menu item. I've got the project open here in my Eclipse environment. And then this application that I'm using is, I'm using a self-hosted control panel here. And so I have my simple app, my first app, in the self-hosted control panel. And in that application, I've just got 2 screens. This is the menu that we're looking at. And then the menu itself is connected to a custom URL screen called Local Courses, which is this one here. And so that's kind of the basics of what's going on. And so when you load Local Courses right now, it's a blank screen on purpose. And I'll show you what URL that is, and that's what we're going to begin to work to start working with. I've also got a blank canvas right here. And this file name is called localcourses.php. So one of the core concepts is, you know, when you, in terms of connecting to your back end to do database things and scripting and things like that, is this concept of the URL. And so where does this URL go? Now we're all familiar with, you know, the standard, you know, Google web page that these things start with when you add a screen, but I've changed that URL. And this is just a long web address pointing to this file that I'm working on, localcourses.php. So that file that we're loading in our Android app is blank right now. I've also taken this URL and I've opened it in a new tab right here just to show us that there's nothing on it. So I just hit refresh and this screen is blank, just like this screen here. So a lot of the discussion today is going to be me refreshing it in the browser so you can see the browser results, and refreshing it in the simulator so that we can see the results in the simulator. And generally those are the same, but one of the concepts that sometimes people lose track of is when you're testing and coding and playing around, there's nothing wrong with taking a URL, putting it in a browser window, and seeing the results. It's sometimes much, much faster to do it that way. So that's kind of the setup, our app, our screen, and we're going to be working with this custom URL screen to try to figure out how can we solve, you know, this problem that Alex Sampson, I keep mispronouncing his name, posed to us. So he says, my firm has a database containing training providers that can currently be searched by navigating to the website and searching using a postcode or entering a course type or a date that they would like to attend. And he's saying what I would like is an app that, 1, uses GPS location data to find the courses, and then 2, allows the user to enter the location and date to search courses. And then he talks about his database. So right away, we need a connection between our app and our back end, and that connection is this URL. Some people will call this a custom script. Some people will call it, you know, coding in the back, whatever you want to call it. I just call it a script or a file. And so in the files manager for this application, I went ahead and uploaded this PHP script that I'm working on. And like I said, it's blank, but I did it just to include it in our project. You can't upload PHP scripts on the buzztouch hosted site, but on this self-hosted control panel I can. So that's kind of the strategy that I used. So let's get into the PHP and add something to this so the screen is no longer blank. And we'll kind of start from there. So the first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to make this a PHP page. And we do that simply by using the PHP tag. And because we're inside a PHP tag, we can't just write something like, hi, I'm in Monterey, because this is not PHP, right? That's just plain text. What we need to do is actually use a command called echo. So I can say, hi, my name is David, and I can just output a simple little bit of text. So again, we're starting from blank on purpose. So if I go to my browser, and you can see I just uploaded that to the server. If I go to my browser, you can see that indeed we are working on that web page, so to speak, or that PHP script. If I go to the simulator and hit refresh, then it'll show us the same thing, right? Hi, my name is David. So right away, we know concretely that this PHP script that I named localcourses.php and uploaded it to my back end is connected to our app. And the reason that it's connected to our app is we're pointing to it in our screens, our custom URL screen. This is the URL of that script. So I'm just going back here to kind of confirm that we're getting what we expect to get. So there's already a problem with this script. This is a custom URL type plugin, so it's expecting HTML. So we want to set the content type. I've got a little cheat sheet here. We want to set the content type to HTML. So text HTML. You don't have to do that, but it's definitely good practice to not surprise any devices or browsers or gadgets or anything like that. And then the next thing that we want to do in our little script here is we want to actually make this HTML. I mean, technically it's not HTML because it's just a bunch of words. So let's create a variable called HTML. We'll paste this in here, and I just created a little variable called HTML. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically build a web page, pasting all this in here, and then we'll go through it line by line. I'm basically building a web page so that the output is HTML. So I started my HTML tag, and then my body tag, and I wrote some text, and then I ended the body tag, and I ended the HTML tag. And so this variable HTML, we could have called it anything. We could have called it data. Doesn't matter what we've called this variable. We're just appending, you know, this value, then this value, then this value, then this value, then this value to the end of that variable, and then we're printing with the word echo at the end of the script all of this stuff. So if we refresh this now, we have a proper HTML document. Doesn't look much different, but if we view the page source now, you'll see that it's actually an HTML document. It's got the proper tags and all that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of the basics. So let's refresh our menu. We'll reload the page, and you can see that we have proper HTML. And we could do anything with this HTML, right? We could style it. You know, we could put this in a paragraph and put, you know, a different kind of style. You know, font family maybe. Verdana, something like that. We could do all kinds of things. This is now in a paragraph tag. We could, you know, change its color, something like that. Because we're working in plain HTML, and that's the output, we can use the HTML syntax to control what this looks like. And keep in mind that I have no idea what the best approach for this search the courses database and output the courses. We could not use HTML as the type, and we could output JSON to build a menu or something like that. There's all kinds of options. I'm just starting with HTML today because I think most of us in the webinar can kind of relate to this better. So the problem we have now is we don't have any idea what courses this person wants to see. We just have a generic page that's outputting the courses. But there's a few different approaches that we can take to query our database and output courses based on some dynamic value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a variable at the end of my URL so that we can learn a little bit about what courses we could show in this web page. So a simple example is maybe I want to use the screen ID. I'm just pasting this in here. I got the screen ID from the URL, which is the buzztouch item ID. Maybe if I'm the person behind this app, I want to output courses for this web page. Maybe I've got a couple different pages. Maybe I've got, you know, courses in New York, courses in Boston. I could simply know by the screen ID what to output. And this is just one idea. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to refresh our app so that that screen ID is now appended to the end of the URL. And when we load this local courses option, you're going to see not any change right off the bat because we didn't change that file at all. These are the courses. But now we have this screen ID that's being stuck to the end of the URL or appended to the URL. So let's get that out of the URL in our script so that we can output the right course. So building on our our idea, let's get the screen ID from the URL before outputting courses, because we don't know what courses we're going to put. We're going to show. So we're going to assume that the screen ID is empty, and then we're going to try to get it from the URL. I say try because what if it doesn't exist, right? What if there's a problem in the let me paste this URL up in our address bar again. What if there's a problem and that screen ID doesn't exist, right? We don't want to ask PHP to grab it if it doesn't exist. So we're going to say if is set. This is just a little cheat. And the get array is holding these values. So we're going to try to say get the screen ID from the URL. But we don't want to do that unless it's set. So if this is set in the URL, then our screen ID is going to equal the get value screen ID. So this value here is coming from this URL, and on this particular screen we think we know what it is, and then we're going to print it, or we're going to append that to our data that we're printing at the end. The screen ID is, so we're just cruising along here to prove to ourselves that we can get variables out of the URL. That's all, and we're going to show this on the screen just to kind of show ourselves that indeed we're getting this out of the URL and we're plopping it on the screen. So in our app, if we refresh this page, we should get the same result, and there's the screen ID. So that's cool. Now we may be able to use this screen ID to query the database. Query database based on the screen ID. Or maybe we want to query the database based on the device's location. Remember, in our forum post, he said, I want an app that uses the GPS location data to find courses in the locality. So that's a little bit of a different concept, but I'm touching on adding things to the end of the URL. We're kind of starting simple here to demonstrate how to get those values out of the URL and then use them in our backend script in our PHP. So we're not even really talking about mobile right now. We're talking about PHP and URLs and get variables and post variables, and it's kind of fascinating how many different directions we can go when we start making apps. But so a lot of this is just PHP today. So we're not going to use the screen ID. We're going to use the latitude and longitude. So following the same logic, let's say we want the latitude. And let's say that we think it's in the URL. So we're going to assume it's empty. And if it's in the URL, we're going to assign the value of it to this variable. We'll do the same thing for longitude. So we're going to say get latitude from URL. And we're going to say get longitude from URL. You can see there's a lot of copying and pasting going on. We all of us programmers do that. Okay, and then we'll echo that stuff just to see if we can get it. Do we have any location data? Typo. So let's append to our data variable a paragraph that says latitude. And let's append a paragraph that says longitude, just so we can see it on the screen again before we get all carried away. I didn't end this paragraph here, see I'm sloppy HTML, I don't want to do that. Okay, so we have latitude and longitude. And we'll upload this, and we'll refresh this screen. And you can see that these are blank. Nothing there. And that makes sense because they're not in our URL. So what if we added them to our URL? Latitude equals, I don't know, 38.345. And longitude equals, I don't know, negative 110.235. And we enter that. Now we have latitude, but we don't have longitude. Why not? Do I have a typo somewhere? Longitude equals. So maybe down here, so my longitude variable, I assigned it to the latitude. So let's make sure we're getting both of these out of the URL. Now we have latitude or longitude, but not latitude. What am I doing here? Latitude, longitude. Anybody see a typo? Latitude, get longitude, get longitude. Maybe I don't have, oh, look at that, latitude, I missed a UDE. Latitude. There we go. So this URL is passing in some hard-coded fixed values for latitude and longitude. But that's okay. It's demonstrating that we can get those out of the URL before we make any decisions in terms of querying our data or deciding what we're going to print. Because remember, the whole concept of this is it's going to be dynamic based on some variables. So let's put this in our document web address. We'll save this. We'll refresh this screen. And you'll see here that latitude and longitude, did I paste the right one here? Latitude equals 38, longitude equals that. Save. Oh, I got to go back and refresh our application. Every time we change this URL in our little design mode here, we're going to get a different output. So there we go. So that latitude and that longitude is hard-coded. We like to call this hard-coded into the URL. So that's not very useful. It's not very helpful. We want to know the latitude and the longitude of the actual device because that tends to change. So the way that we do that is we use merge fields. And this plug in here, the custom URL, I was looking through here, it should probably explain merge fields here, and it doesn't do a very good job of that. But I'm going to go to the docs and show you. Let me open up another window here where this stuff is. Oops. What did I do? Just trying to go back to this forum post. There we go. So in the how-to section, in the documentation, you'll see here data URLs and merge fields. I have this, of course, memorized, but you guys might want to look at these different merge fields that we can use, and we can stick them on the end of our URLs anywhere in the application that you use a URL. So we want device latitude and device longitude to be magically inserted into this URL dynamically because we know that the phone moves around. So instead of typing in a hard-coded value for latitude, I'm going to put in a little bracket here, and I'm going to put in device latitude, and I'm going to put in longitude, device longitude, and I'm going to save this. And what I'm going to do here, and this is going to be kind of interesting, you'll enjoy this. And I knew that syntax because I looked it up here, right? It's just a merge field. If we put this up in the address bar now in our regular browser, you might not get what you'd expect because our browser is not merging anything, right? I'm not adding any values in the browser. I'm just literally typing this URL. But watch what happens in the phone. It's going to be blank again, and I'll explain why here in a minute. But watch what happens in the phone when we ask it to use those merge fields. So when we look at local courses now, you're going to get blank. And that's because the simulator is not sending the latitude and longitude values. Those values are arriving empty. And so that's an important concept. We think we're going to get those values, but you're not always going to get those values. So in our script here, latitude is equal, in the phone's case, it's equaling nothing. But in the browser's case, it's equaling, you know, the little bracket value because we're not merging that in there. So we want to make sure and do a little cleanup. And we want to say, make sure lat lon are numeric. Because if they're not, we don't want to, go query and try to assume their location information if it's not. So if not is numeric latitude, then we're going to say like latitude equals 0 or something like that. We just want to make sure that this is a number that's being sent by the device or in our browser if we don't paste in an actual latitude and longitude. So longitude, we need to check that too. So now when we refresh this, we're going to get zeros here in the browser because these are not numeric, and we're going to get zeros here in the device because the simulator's not sending its latitude and longitude information. So if in the real world on an actual device, you would get something like 37.664 or 1110. Whatever. So I'm going to trick that. I'm going to go back in our browser here and I'm going to type in some fake values again so we can kind of expand on our idea. And then we'll talk for a second and make sure we recap what we did. So if they're available and if they're numeric, we're going to use them. If they're not numeric and they're not available, we're just going to ignore them. And so that's one of the disappointing things about the simulator. Now I understand in terms of latitude and longitude. Now I understand that I can get this simulator, edit, and I can modify this and allow it to like fake its location, GPS support, these kinds of options. But you know what? To be frank, I've never had any luck with these Android emulators and getting them to fake their locations. It just ends up confusing things worse. So, certainly I encourage you to test that stuff, but it's best to use this on a device. The problem with doing it on a device in a webinar is you guys won't be able to see it. So it's kind of a balancing act between, an actual device, which is how I develop. I always use a device, and the emulator, which is something I can show on the screen. So what I'm going to do is trust that you understand kind of what we're doing here with these merge fields. And I'm going to go back and hard code them so that the device sends us something fake. That way we can continue our discussion. We'll say something like that. Actually, I think latitudes are positive and longitudes are negative in most parts of the world. Something like that. Okay, so we'll save this again. We'll refresh this again. I see we've got a bouncing question. We'll take that in just a sec. And before we can even talk about databases, we had to talk about how are we going to connect this stuff to our back end. Okay, there we go. So let's look at probably a chat, or let's see here. Yeah, so Warren's saying, hey, 30 minutes. If anybody's got any questions, that's great. I appreciate that reminder. Let's stop there. And let's see if anybody wants to add anything or ask anything. And what's open is we got a simple little PHP script that's outputting HTML. It's not using yet, but it's pulling variables from the URL. And we're going to now use that in our application somehow strategic. So anybody got any questions before we move on? It looks like Susan's got her hand up.
Well, before we get, I'm sorry. Niraj has a question. So Susan, if you could wait until after Niraj gets his question answered.
Hi there, David. Hi. I was just wondering, I understand that we can query the database using that information and get the data. Then how can we feed that back to the device? And you're showing how we can feed it in HTML format. How can we feed it back to the device in JSON format?
Okay, great. Yeah, great question. We can we'll switch that up here in just a sec after we get to Susan's question. And to revisit what he just said, what if we were trying to build a menu out of this data or something like that? We wouldn't want HTML, right? We'd want list items for a menu. So that's a great question. And in fact, why don't we just take it in that direction, like for the rest of this discussion? I'll change this up and show everyone that. Yeah, good question. So Susan, what's up with yours?
My question, oh, sorry, I know my dogs are barking just as I got turned off the mic. My question was simpler, and it's a very stupid question, but how you appended was just the dot, so that you know how you have the dollar sign data and then space and dot. That's how you're appending. You're appending to the URL is through that.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's another approach, just real quick. I just created a variable called data. And its initial value, where I put the equals here, data equals HTML. And then every line after that, I'm adding, or we call that concatenating. I can't say that very well. Concatenating this to this. And in PHP, you do that with the dot equals. So if this was a number, a 9, dot equals 8 would mean 9 plus 8. But when we're dealing with string values, it means this plus this. So by the end of our little script here, data is really, really long, and I just echoed it right here. So I could have easily echoed every one of these lines instead of appending. I could have echoed HTML, and I could have echoed body, right? I'm just, or echo body, and then just print all the way down the screen. It would have been the same result. I like to connect things to a variable and then print it all at the end all at once. That's just kind of my strategy. But yeah, to answer your question, we're just connecting these two string values together.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so let's go back to that idea of making this JSON data. Makes perfect sense. So let's first make a new screen in our app that's a menu. Let's go to Screens, and let's go to our Home menu, and let's add a row. Let's put Dynamic Menu, and I'll create a new one here. I'll say Menu Simple, and I'll put this. I'll call this Dynamic, or I'll call this Course List, just for fun. So now we have in our application on our home screen, we're going to have another choice here, and it's going to be Dynamic Menu. And when I click it right now, we're not going to get any items because there's no items, which makes perfect sense. So let's work on this course list instead of our HTML page. It's the same concepts, but it's a little bit different. So the data URL, in fact, on this plugin, you can see that we summarize those merge fields, which is cool. On the data URL, let's use the same one we were using on this other screen. And we'll put that here. And we'll save this. Now we know, because we've kind of read a little bit and kind of messed with this software a little bit, that this data URL is outputting HTML, right? This is HTML output. We don't want HTML because our menus don't understand what HTML is. We want to output JSON. So what I'm going to do is, instead of making HTML out of this, I'm just going to change our content type to text plain. You could also do JSON, but I like using text plain to tell the browser that this is just simple text. We're going to start our, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all this out of here just to start fresh, and I'll put it in our little notepad so I can copy and paste it when I come back. This is just my little cheat sheet, a little palette I can use while we talk, so in case we need to go back to it. So what we want to do is kind of the same idea, right? We want to get the latitude and longitude and screen ID out of the query string. So we can do that at the top. It doesn't matter where we do that. We'll do it up here. Doesn't really matter in this context, but we do need the values, so we'll grab them at the top of our script. We're not outputting them anywhere yet. We're just filling these variables with values. And then what we're going to do is we'll say start the JSON variable. So we'll just call this JSON, and we know that JSON starts with a curly brace. And we'll end the JSON, so we'll append to the end of it, right? So now we have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace, and then we'll print this to the screen. I could have left the name of this variable HTML, but it feels better to use the word JSON because that's what we're doing, right? We're outputting JSON data. And this brings up a great question. So I'll print this. It's just empty JSON right now. So what is the JSON data for a screen menu list supposed to look like, right? What the heck is it supposed to look like? So let's open up this, go back to the docs. And we could have looked at it in a lot of different ways, but we'll look at menu list. And you can see that, our menu list has this kind of information for the menu itself, but then there's a child items array. And if we go to the child items, in fact, The plugin details probably show us that too. We're on the plugin screen here. If I go to the README, yeah, here we go. It's saying, hey, that the child item should look like this. So I'm just going to copy this. And there's another example down here of what these child items should look like. So I'll just copy this just as a starting point. We've started our JSON. Let's just make one row. So our child items, we're going to add this to our data that we're going to print to the screen. In PHP, this kind of tricks people, but the quote marks need to be preceded with the backslash. We call that escaping in PHP. We need to escape those quotes. So I'm just going to copy and paste a bunch of stuff here. And then bear with me while I escape all these, because we want to print those quotes to the screen. So we could do this, we could do this. We're just creating one item in our JSON data. I know I'm going to miss one of these by the time we're done, but we'll find it if I make a typo. And this is still not dynamic. This is just me what I call hard coding these values, which is fine. Okay, so we need to end this here. Okay, so let's write ourselves a little note. Start child items. I'll indent this a little bit to make it easier to read. Output one item for each row. End child items. And then end the JSON. So if I refresh this in my browser, we're going to have one item in this list. I go back here. Where's our URL? Here it is. So now we have a child items array. It's got the square brackets, so it's an array, and it has one item in it. So that's kind of cool. Now this URL is connected, is that the word I used? Powering, whatever we want to call it, powering this menu. So when we refresh that in the simulator, we should get one row in our menu. So if I go to the dynamic menu here, I don't have anything on this case. Do I need to change the background color maybe? Let's look here. Oh, I know what I did. Let's refresh this. It didn't have a data URL when we first loaded it. Now we have a data URL. And so our dynamic menu has one item in it. And it's coming from this URL, which is outputting, where is it? There it is. This data. So it doesn't really do anything, but let's make it do something just for fun. So we got a bunch of screens in our app, right? So let's load our course list, which has item ID up here. This is just a hack for fun. Let's load our course list when you tap on it. So load screen with item ID. Let's change it to an actual item ID. Or we could say, we could use the nickname, load screen with nickname. We could change this and say load screen with nickname. Same concept, right? Same idea. Let's refresh this, and oh, let's change the text on the menu. Show courses. And because we have a data URL on this menu, you get a refresh screen option. And now we have show courses, and when I tap this, it's going to load the screen with this item ID, which is just our little web page, right? Oh, you know what I did? I put the ID to itself. That's funny. This is the menu here. I want the item ID for the courses. Here we go. Yep. We don't want to, it's funny how you can just keep loading yourself, right, if you just put the same ID in there. So let's refresh this, and let's go back and load our courses. There we go, and look, since this is the same script, it's showing our output. Remember, we're using the same script on both of those pages, but we just demonstrated how we could create one of those. So let's do like 10 of them. Let's make a little loop. And I'm saying, hey, do this 10 times. And I'm going to introduce an error here on purpose. I want to show you what happens when I introduce an error. There's an error in this code, or in this logic. I'll show you. In our browser, we're going to have 10 rows. And there they all are. But because this is an array of child items, we need a comma after each one of these items, except for the last item. So that would break our script. So I want to put a comma after this, which is going to fix part of it, but also going to produce another little challenge. And I'll show you what I mean. See the commas here? That's cool. But this is no longer valid because our last item doesn't have a comma. It does in ours, but we want to put a comma there. I mean, we don't want a comma after our last item in an array. So we don't want to add a comma unless this is, not the last item. So if x is less than 10, add a comma. Right here, since we know we're doing this 10 times. So now what it should do is not put a comma on the last one. Let's verify this. Oops. How about 9? Oh, because I'm going 0 to 10. Yeah, so maybe it's 9. Point is, I'm just trying to identify this being the last one. I see maybe we have another question bouncing around, which is cool, but let me get through this real quick. Why is that? Oh, I commented this out. Duh. If x is less than 9, add comma if not the last item. It's funny how my internet's kind of slow today, and each one of these edits I've got to replace. Uh-oh, error. Oh, I need a parentheses here. Syntax error. Editing it. I don't edit things live on this server, but it just means we got to wait a little bit while I refresh this stuff. Okay, so we don't have a comma here after the last one, which is cool. So now when I refresh this menu, we're going to get 10 items. They all do the same thing because we just, did a little loop, right? But we could put show course. Let's put the value of x here so we can see the number on the screen just for fun. And since it starts at 0, we probably don't want to say show course 0. Let's do course plus x plus 1. I'm just playing around now, showing you how we can manipulate this stuff, which is kind of cool. But show course 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got another bouncing question. Will you please post the cheat sheets and sample PH files somewhere so we look at them? Absolutely, especially the JSON menu feeder, totally. Question from Niraj, how would we cache that JSON data for offline use? Awesome question. Depending on how you're using that, we're talking about caching right now. As far as Tim's question, posting the cheat sheet, absolutely. Niraj's question is, how do I cache this data on the device for offline use? And the answer is, it already is cached. This particular plugin, let's go look at it. Source is the menu list plugin. And if we go to screen menu list simple, I think it's called, here we go, menu list simple. We're going to look at this logic, blah, 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 blah. I know right where to go, so I'm going to look at it and show you. When this screen starts, it's going to say, hey, does this cached file exist? And the file is a copy of this data right here, right? So after it downloads it, it saves it to the device. And so we're saying to ourselves, where'd I go here? Did I jump to the top accidentally? Where's my load data method? On start. Yeah, here we go. So if the file exists, then we're going to parse it or read it, the text data that we have stored on the cache. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to see if this screen uses a data URL, which it does. And if it has a data URL, we're going to trigger a method called refresh screen data. So let's go find that method and see what it looks like. It's in the screen. I'm just going to search for it. So that's a great question, and the fact is it's already happening. So refresh screen data initializes the download of the data, and then when the download of the data is done, which happens down here, download screen data handler, we're going to hide the progress. And so this little downloader object that we have built in here is saving it in the cache for us already. So that's a great question. So if I disconnected this device and ran this menu again, this would be here. It would not need the internet. It would the first time and not the second time. So a question from Daku7. You have 10 menus now. What is the max number of menu items you can have? I don't know. Let's play. I guess that would depend on the size of the device's memory, right? Let's put 100 and see what happens. Just for kicks, right? I guess it would depend on how long you want to take to download the stuff, for one. Like this is taking a little bit of time because we're putting 100 menu items on here. So Android on the simulator is already choking with only 100 items. I wouldn't, as a user, want a menu with 100 items, but somebody might. Oh, and it's broken because I didn't fix my 9 down here. We want to do 99. Okay, so there's 100. Handled that pretty quick. Scroll's pretty smooth. Let's get really funky and do 1,000. Let's do 1,000 menu rows. 1,000 web pages. So this is 99 in the regular browser. This is 1,000 in the regular browser. Loads pretty fast, so our back end is quick. Let's see if Android can handle a menu with 1,000 items in it. This is kind of fun. So that's loading. It's done loading. It's kind of choking. Oh wait, we broke it again because we got to put the comma after the 9, or take the comma away after the 999th one. Menu, refresh. Let's see what it does with 1,000. Hey, not too bad. It scrolls a little slower, but yeah, there's 1,000. Kind of cool. Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm going to put this back to 10 because we don't want to screw around with 1,000 of them. That was funny. Okay, so now we've kind of jumped away from HTML and now gone to JSON to create a menu item. And so because these child items are powering a menu, we needed to know the output syntax or format or whatever you want to call it. And I got that by looking at the README in this particular plugin. So if this was a map, oh, this is the URL. Let's go back to our menu, our course list. So the README showed us that this was the syntax for the child items. But if this was a map, you know, these would be location items. If this was a quiz, these would be quiz questions. If this was a photo gallery, then these would be photo items. But the concept's going to be the same. And almost all the plugins, I think all of them actually use the term child items. A developer might change that to, you know, photos or something, but we've kind of encouraged everybody to use the same term. And we're just looping through them and creating an item out of each one. So I'm going to stop again and take questions, and then we'll move on to how do we do this from the database. It's basically the same thing, but you know, it'll be interesting to see, you know, to see how that works in data. So any other questions before we move on? Looks like Daku's got another question. Can't hear him if he's talking. Is he typing maybe?
I had his microphone muted.
Hi, David. Are you able to hear me now?
Is it Daku or Daku?
Daku.
Daku. Okay, yeah, I can hear you great.
Great, thanks. Just had a quick question. I noticed that you uploaded the PHP file also to the hosted control panel. Now,
Yes.
if this PHP file was hosted on a separate server, let's say your website server, and then your hosted control panel is a separate server, why did you upload it also into the hosted control panel? Because from the URL, you're already referencing it to a separate server where the PHP file is being hosted.
I think I understand your question, and frankly, I could have very, very easily used this screen, selected the file on my computer, and uploaded it that way. But it's much faster. I've just got an FTP client connected to this this back end. So I could click this and we're going to get the exact same thing. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just using a client here locally instead of this web page to upload it.
Is that required to upload it to the hosted control panel?
The buzztouch.com hosted control panel, if you go to your, this is just kind of a thing that we haven't really been able to figure out the best approach yet. If you go to BuzzTouch and you look at one of your apps, it's going to go to my control panel and look at one of my apps. If I go to my little debug app here and I go to the files and media, you see where it says PHP scripts? You can't upload those on the buzztouch.com site today. There's no way to do that because we have no way to validate what your script does. And you could be doing damage and all those kinds of things. So in this example, you probably wouldn't be putting the script, well, you can't put the script on the buzztouch.com site. So you'd either be putting it on your own site somewhere else, or if you're running a self-hosted server, or because you can upload plain text, you could just save this as a text file and upload a text file in your documents and point to that text file, and it would give you the same result, but because it's a text file, you wouldn't be able to do dynamic things because we can't process PHP in a text file. So hopefully that answers your question. Now there is an alternative approach to get a PHP file on the buzztouch.com system, and today the only way to do that would be to use the custom plugins screen right here, plugins. Where am I going to go here? Where am I going? Oh, here we go. Installed plugins. And then I would create a custom plugin, and you can write whatever script you want, and then we would have to just look at it and approve it. And so it's a little bit janky, but that's kind of the idea. I assume that most people who are this advanced and going to be scripting and coding and all that are either running their own back end using the self-hosted solution or going to plop this on their website or their WordPress install or something like that. That's a great question, though. Yeah. If your backend will run PHP, you can use.
Would you mind if I just rephrase that question? Not so clear. So let's say the hosted control panel is self-hosted control panel is on server A, and the PHP is on server B. Now, we make changes to PHP on server B, and we obviously put the URL into the self-hosted section. In this scenario, if we upload the PHP again to the server A, which is the hosted control panel, it is what is the usefulness of doing it that way? Because it's not going to reference it. It's just a static.
Yeah, it wouldn't be useful. This would say something like, my server B, something like that, and you wouldn't be using the file manager to do that. Because like you said, this script would exist on some other machine, your friend's website or whatever.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so basically you just wouldn't be using this functionality for that particular case or that screen.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, because you'd be pointing at something else. And that happens actually, right? I mean, you could write a script. Here's something that's interesting, and I haven't really seen this happen yet, but you could write a script and put it on your server somewhere that outputs JSON. Let's say it outputs whatever, baseball scores. Then you can tell everybody, hey, use this URL to get baseball scores, right? That would be completely fine. If I knew the URL as an app owner, and I knew that you'd let me do that and wouldn't mind me doing that, I could plop that thing right in here, and the phone would download it. The one cool thing about the difference between a browser and a mobile device is in a browser, when you're talking about JavaScript and back-end coding and all that kind of stuff, browsers and the public at large are really hypersensitive to this concept of cross-domain scripting attacks. And so like if you had one button on a web page that clicked and got data from your site and another button that clicked and got data from my site, the browser would really, really work hard to prevent the user from doing that because it appears that you're doing something tricky. And we call that cross-domain scripting, and it is, it's a vulnerability. If I'm on ESPN.com, I want the data to come from ESPN.com. I don't want it coming from somewhere else. But on a device, that's not the case. This screen can pull it from your domain. The other screen can pull it from my domain, right? There's no such concept. And it's kind of cool. So it allows us a lot of freedoms in terms of, you can be pulling stuff from all different kinds of places, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, great question. Yeah, so let's get back to this. Let's stick with our menu concept. And let's get rid of this loop for a second. I'm just going to comment this out. And we're going to go to the database, right? So we have our variables, our latitude and our longitude. In the browser, they're real because we stuck them in the URL here. In the device, they're not real because we're on the simulator. So we're not actually going to use that, that metric or that dynamic. Let's print something else from our control panel. Let's print, I don't know, just for fun, let's print the application user list for this application. Or let's print, what else could we print? I don't know. How about we print a list of apps? So if I go to application home, maybe I go to my applications, and I'm going to create a new app, my second app. I'm doing this just for fun to get it in our database. So if I go to, we're just going to explore some code here. Okay, so now I have two apps. We're going to go back to where we were, screens. And just for fun, we want to show in this menu a list of all the applications we have, just for fun. So we would go to the database, go to database, get the list of apps. A lot of this is going to be me cheating a little bit because there's too much to type here. We're running out of time a little bit, but how do I know, how do I know how to query the database for the list of applications? I can take a couple different strategies. I could go here and as an administrator in my control panel, and I could look at the database information, and I could say, oh, cool, there's a table called applications, and it's got 3 in there. One's probably been deleted, but we can get some clues out of this. And if I click applications, then I can see all the different column properties for this applications table. So let's write a little query here. This is just one little way to figure out how to do it. Let's call this string SQL as a variable name. Select, I don't know, what do we want? App name? Sure, let's get the name and the ID from the applications list. Let's get the ID and the app name. Right here, oh, it's name, not app name. Name from table applications. It's interesting here. You see how I'm hard coding this value here, table applications? That's because, here we go, that would get them all. Where ID is more than 5, whatever. We'll just get them all. So that's the query that we're going to process against our database. But right now, we don't have a connection to our database. This code knows nothing about our database. So we could write all kinds of long code to find it and connect and all that kind of stuff. Or we can do what all the other plugins do, and we can cheat a little bit. And we can say, hey, our database and a lot of these other files that we use in our database are all included in this utilities class, or in this config.php class. So I'm going to include that at the top of our script like it's included in everything else. And the reason I'm going to do that is that config and our self-hosted server, it knows all kinds of stuff about the installation of my database and what it's called and all that kind of stuff. So we'll include that at the top here so that we don't have to write a bunch of database connection logic. We've written a query, select the unique ID and the name from table applications. So that's kind of cool. Now we need to execute that query. And again, we could write a lot of code, or we can just draw on some other code. Let's go here and see how, I don't know, let's see how the control panel shows us the list of applications. I'm just going to jump in here and we'll go to put index. I know where to look because in my control panel, when I go to application list, this is clearly showing me the apps, and that's the, oh, I want to go to my account. This is clearly showing me the apps, and that's the file. So let's go here and look at this file and see how it executed it. So what we're going to do is just leave this open. So get results from database. So we'll call this results, just for fun. So there's a built-in method called function database get result. We actually want the result from, and it takes a few parameters, the host, the database name, the database user, the database password. And remember, all that is coming from this configuration file, so we don't have to type all that stuff again. We want to execute this query. So this will execute the query and fill the results with the number of rows in the database. So let's, and we're not doing anything with that yet, but let's refresh this and make sure we haven't broken anything. It's a good idea when you're doing this stuff to kind of test it from time to time and make sure you haven't broken anything. Ah, error, table database table applications doesn't exist. See, I've got TBL. I think this is called BT applications. There we go. So there's our JSON. We haven't added any rows to it, but we've now got an array full of applications. So going back to our fun stuff, we're going to loop through those. Just like instead of doing our for loop with a fixed count, we're going to say loop through results. We're going to have a little counter here, a little flag. We'll start it at 0. So if we have results, the number of rows will equal the number of rows from the results. If we have rows, we don't want to do this if we don't have any rows, then you want to loop through. So we have a while loop. While this row equals the data, we'll increment our count 1. We'll end our while loop. We'll end the if num rows, and then we'll end the if results. So if we have rows, we're going to want to output those rows right here in our loop instead of doing this generic stuff. We want to give each one of these a unique ID, right? So let's give it the ID of each row, just for fun. This is going to be row GUI ID. They're all menu items. For the title text, we probably want to put the name of the application. The row name. We can leave we'll just put the row name. And then what screen are we going to load? We'll leave that the same for now. And then remember our comma? We've got to figure that logic out because we've got to do our comma after each one except the last one. So if count is less than the number of rows, then add our comma. So that's just a super, super simple way without a whole lot of code. I know a lot of you think that there's a lot of code there, but there's really not a lot of code there. I have an error because I forgot a bracket. It's kind of sort of the same thing as a hard-coded for loop. It's just a dynamic for loop, right? So here's our data. So if we look at this, I'm going to look at it. Can I view source and then put line breaks in it? I can't remember. No, I guess it won't let me edit that, but it's hard to read sometimes like this. But you have child items, and you got the item ID, got the item type, and then you have the text of the application. And you got the load screen with ID, and then you got the next one, and then the next one, then no comma after the last one. So let's refresh this. And now we have dynamically done this. So why are there 3 here and only 2 here? I kind of know this as a secret. When you, well, not as a secret, but because I built the damn thing. When you delete an application, it removes a lot of the stuff in the system, but it does not remove it from the database. So when you use this delete application, you're not removing the row from the database. So we're querying the applications table, and it's showing us all 3 rows when really we only have 2 valid apps because we deleted one. So we need to put a condition in our query. We don't want all the apps. We want the apps where, I think it's status. I can't remember. Let's see. Yeah, status right here. So we want where status does not equal deleted. And what that'll do is limit the list to only the actual real applications. Yeah, so there's 2 now. So that's kind of cool. So we can refresh this. So we have my first app, my second app. You know, maybe we wanted to order them a certain way, right? Order by name, descending. Right now they're ascending, right? F is in front of S. So maybe we want to order those in a different way. There we go. So this is just a simple demonstration. I'm going to get rid of all this as to how we built a PHP script from scratch. We fetched the screen ID out of the URL if it existed. We scratched the latitude and the longitude. We're not using them in our query yet. We validated that the latitude was numeric. We validated that the longitude was numeric. We created a variable called Json and just started appending a bunch of text data to it. We wrote a little query. We executed that query, taking advantage of our pre-built stuff in our control panel, so we don't have to write a bunch of code. We looped through the results, appending or concatenating or adding an item for each thing. We added a comma to each row if it wasn't the last row. We ended the JSON, or we ended the array of child items, and then we ended the JSON itself, and then we echoed it to the screen, and then we quit. So this is just a simple way, and here's where the magic would come in. You're probably going to change this query based on the location or something like that, or maybe you're not querying applications. Maybe you're querying, you know, my course catalog, which is a table. I don't know how to spell catalog. You know, maybe you created a table in your database called my course catalog, and you're querying that. Yeah, you make your own table, and it's got, you know, course name, course location, or something like that, going back to that original question, right? He's got courses, and then you would query that table instead of the applications table. I just did it this way to demonstrate, you know, what we can do just kind of built in. So I'm going to make a couple more comments, and then we're going to take a couple more questions. One thing that we did not cover, which we can cover next time, is kind of his second question. We can easily use the GPS location data, just sticking it right in the URL in our app list. And remember, we added it to the URL, screens, our course list. Remember, we appended that variable to the end of this. So we can take advantage of some of the values in the system. Well, we hard-coded them here, but if we put the merge fields, device, URL, we can do it right in there. But we have not addressed this second question. Allow users to enter a location and date to search. So we don't have time today to actually make that screen, but what you would probably do is have a menu called search. Then you would have a screen that loaded a search box or a pick list or something like that with a submit button. It would connect to your script, and it would output the courses based on the values that arrived in either the get or the post variables. So again, that's complicated, but maybe next time. I think this is tremendously useful, but you know, that's just my opinion. So we got a couple more questions. How do you get information from the user or the device for query? Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I just said. And then Niraj has got a different question here. Let me start with Susan's first. How do I get information from the user or the device for query? If you want to get information that we anticipated you getting, you can get this information just by merging these fields. Let's say you wanted to know what kind of model this was, right? You would put in your URL and device model, or whatever you wanted to name your variable, equals, and you put this merge field value in, and you'd say submit, and you see where it says, whoops, device model. That will get merged with the device's model. So let's prove that. So we need another variable to grab that model. Device model. So let's call this device model. We named our variable in our URL device model. So I'm saving that. So if the device model exists in the URL, grab it. Let's take the the value, and I can't remember if the simulator sends that or not, but let's find out. And let's attach it to the row here, just for fun. We'll say app. Instead of putting the app name here, we'll put device model. And this is just a test. So right now it's blank. Yeah, in case it's, I'll put the word model in there so that it's not blank. If I go back, I refresh this app. Let's see if the device sends the model. Yeah, there you go. So model is generic Google SDK. Pretty slick. So we got values from the device in this method just by appending this merge field. So you want the user's email? You're not going to know that unless you have a login screen. You want the screen ID, which app is it, the device ID, which will be unique per that device. So hopefully that will help you, Susan. The other approach to collecting user data, or user input as you put it, you do need to create some kind of a screen to capture that data. Probably a couple of text boxes, a submit button, whatever. And it's going to post that data to your URL. So Andy, I see your question. We're going to go back to Niraj. This is a good example for using the BuzzTouch self-hosted server to host the custom PHP files. What other things are available via the BuzzTouch PHP framework? Config.php. That's a great question. Lots of stuff. And so the two tricks there are, or the two things to know there are, there's two files that are really, really important when you're working with the self-hosted panel, and one is this configuration file. So you're going to see there's a bunch of constants that are set up. You know, this is as it relates to the control panel itself. So you can get all these variables from the control panel. You know, what is the name of the database? What are the table users, applications, all that kind of stuff. But that's not necessarily very powerful because there's not a whole lot of stuff there that you probably don't already know if you're running this server. The more important concept here is at the end of this file, which is included on every page, you have a line here on 178 where it says include utility functions.php. That's where it's super powerful. So utility functions.php, which is in your include folder, it has literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of methods that I wrote that you can use. And so utility functions.text names all the methods, so you can just kind of roll your eyes down them and see what the heck they do. Utility.php or functions.php actually has all the functions in it. I think this is about 1,000 lines long. Oh, I've been busy. It's almost 2,000 lines long. So this is a perfect example of, you know, the database get result. I didn't write that on this script because it would take too long. I just leveraged the fact that I knew that this existed in this utilities script. So if you look at that, it's already in here, and it's, you know, going to report, connect. It's going to do all that database work. And so a lot of database stuff like execute non-query, get a value, get a row, get a list. That's kind of cool. And then there's all kinds of other utility functions in here that really make a lot of sense, right? You'll just have to roll through these, and it'll just help you in your code. But there's a lot to go through, right? If you're not a PHP guy, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those. But if you are, then awesome. So Deku7 asks, are there any plans for BuzzTouch to launch push notification? I will say this before I get to Andy's. We have a lot of new stuff coming out in January that we're very excited about. I've let a few of those secrets out. I'm not prepared to let the rest of those secrets out, and we do hope that push is one of those. Let's just say that, but there are no promises there. So anyway, great question. Andy, hand up. What's up, dude?
Yeah, I think it's cool, this location thing, but what would be the code to say, you know, because obviously he's after a list of courses available in his area. What restricts it to the people in his area? Is that complex, or is it quite simple?
It can be complex. Yeah, that's a great question. And there's really two different strategies for querying location data. And when I say two different strategies, I'm talking about kind of generally in the programming internet world, you know, because location data is so important now, there's a couple of different strategies. And one strategy is related to what I would just call kind of a region, not necessarily a precise location. An example of that would be like maybe you have a map in your app that uses a backend script that produces map locations, within a 50-mile circle of the person. So that's like a region. So you would need to know some things, right? You would need to know where the guy is. Then the device, you would need to know where the device is. Then you would need to know what data do you have? How many records do you have in a table that knows locations? So like in your table, you might have, let me go back to admin here and look at our database. In his case, the course catalog, he would probably have items. This is just an example, but his course catalog would have latitude, longitude for each course, identifying it. And so this is kind of a regional way. And so what you would do is, and this is not very efficient in PHP, right? So I want to make sure and throw that out there. If you get a database full of 10,000 locations, you probably don't want to use this type of logic. But I mean, I've done it, but you probably want to limit this logic to something like 500, 1,000, or something like that. But so you have the latitude, then you have the longitude, and then you have all the results, right? So you would probably go to your database and get the list of courses so that you can now do a little bit of math and compare, is the device, quote unquote, within some kind of a circle or within a range that I'm looking for. So we also need a range, like do you want 1 mile, 2 miles, 10 miles? And it can get kind of complicated. I wrote a script, one of you guys might know it more than me. There's a script somewhere, let's see if I've got it on this machine. There's a script somewhere that I wrote and I shared it with the world, you guys. That was kind of a location aware kind of thing. Let's see if I can find it. Locations demo, maybe? Let's have a look at this. Yeah, this was last year in 2011. Yeah, here we go. So let's roll through the script and I'll show you how it works. So there's a function called getDistance, and it says here, this function calculates the distance between two locations. That's important to know. And there's a bunch of math here. And we've got, a location, a list of location data in a CSV file. Let's open that. Do I have that in this same folder? I bet I do. Locations hyphen or underscore sample. Location sample, where is it? Locations demo.txt maybe? Yeah, same idea. So you can see we've got a child items array full of locations, and they have a latitude and a longitude. Then we have distance from device, which is kind of cool. Got a name of a restaurant, it looks like. These are just child items, and then it's got here, a load screen object. So when you tap it, you're going to load a details screen or whatever. But the point is, in this example script that I wrote a couple years ago, we're opening up a file of a comma-separated value file of locations. We're not using a database. We're using a flat file. We're getting the latitude and longitude. We're looping through the data. We're comparing the data. You see where it says distance from device equals get distance. Remember, that's this function up here. And we're saying, hey, if the device is within a certain amount of space, then we want to include it in our results. So there's a lot, and here's a bunch of results. This is complicated. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. And so that method is using PHP and some math. You see this degree 2 radians function, which is built in, to calculate the difference between the distance in the data to the device. So that's one method. The other method, don't think I have a sample file here, is you can actually use MySQL and do a bunch of math and say only get the rows from the database that are within a certain distance. So that's a different kind of an approach, but it's certainly doable, and it's probably faster for me to just Google it. MySQL, what do we do? Geo distance from maybe query. Distance from query. You can just look at the syntax here, and there's lots of examples of this. But it's all going to hinge on the fact that your data has location information for each of the things that you're querying. Let's see if I can find one that loads fast. Yeah, here we go. So select, and then you can see the math that you're asking MySQL to do from, in this case, locations, having distance less than certain miles. So there's all kinds of strategies. But yeah, I'm a PHP guy, and I like to process it on the PHP side because I don't usually like to hammer the database to do all those kinds of calculations because it's, and from my experience, unless you have an extraordinarily large database that's extraordinarily well-tuned, well-indexed, it'll be much faster to run it in the middleware, the PHP, than it will your relational database server. So hopefully that helps you there, Andy. It's a complex question, but it's a wonderfully fun exercise if you want to try to pull something like that off. And local course, I mean, that sample file that I just found looks like we went through that a couple years ago, or a year ago, or whatever. Looks like we got about 10 minutes. Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any, which is cool. So I think what we should do in the next one is schedule another event, and we'll build a screen to take the user's input to then output some choices like was suggested in Alex Sampson's original question. We have some of this taken care of, but we don't have all of it taken care of because it's just a little bit more work. And you just can't do that in 90 minutes and explain it all. Right? Part of what I like to do in these webinars is actually do it right in front of you instead of just copying and pasting, because it really does help, I think, put some context around what we're doing. So let's summarize this, unless somebody has another question, and I'll pay attention to the screen here. But let's summarize what we did. We made an app that had a couple basic screens. We made a script and put it on a server somewhere. And then we took advantage of the data URL property to point to that script. And then we also took advantage of some of the merge fields, like the device model or the device location, and we appended those to our URL. And then we connected that here. We hit refresh a bunch of times because that's what the device would do. We talked about caching. What else did we do? We talked about some simple PHP concepts, how to take advantage of a bunch of code that's already in your self-hosted server. You know, how do you get variables from the URL? Outputting some simple data, you know, echo and some concepts there, some neat little database concepts. We wrote a little query. We executed that command against the database, and again used these constants from our configuration file. We outputted a variable number of rows. In fact, in one of our examples, we made 1,000 rows in the menu, which was kind of cool, kind of goofy. But anyway, so Niraj is asking, hey, to take user input, would the input be taken with HTML or native code? Either way. Either way, I found that our audience so far is more familiar making HTML screens to build the forms, and you're completely you know, fine to do that. But I've also, as compared to making a native activity with a text field and a button and all that, what I found is it's very, very difficult to make HTML. I mean, I can do it, and a lot of other people can do it or whatever, but it is challenging for newcomers who can produce an HTML page that would load, you know, a screen that's rendered in HTML that is what I would call of quality enough to feel and act native. And that's an important thing. And so if you want to bake it into your app and compile it, totally, you can go for it. And the idea would be, let's say you had a form post in your HTML, like, you know what forms are, right? So you would look at the form tag in your HTML, like this right here, and you would post it. The action would be to your custom script, and then your custom script would produce something, probably like this. So there's so many variables on what you can do with that input. It's hard to know like the best option. I think what I would probably do is build a screen, and again we'll think about this app where we want to take a location or a pick list or something. I would build a screen with a submit button. I would hit submit. I would show the loading indicator. I would hit that script with the value in the text box. It would output JSON. I'm still on that entry form with the text box. When the results came back, I would save those to the database or to the file system on the phone, using, you know, some of these other concepts like that we used here with, you know, the file manager and the, you know, if the cached file exists and so on and so forth. Like you can pull out all these things here, right? The BT file manager. I would save the results, and then I would transition to the next activity, which would be a way to display those results. I wouldn't try to do that all on the same screen. That's how I would do it. And so, but again, there's lots of ways. So another question here, if I want to display app description text after the user clicks app name from dynamic menu, how would I format this page so it looks good instead of just looking like plain text? If you can hear me, why don't you rephrase that? I don't quite know what you're asking.
Daku, go ahead with your question.
Maybe his mic's off.
He's got himself muted, so Daku, take your muting off and go ahead and ask the question.
Hi, David. Sorry, let me rephrase that question.
Yeah,
we created a dynamic menu, and that information is coming from the database about app name 1 and app name 2. Let's say clicking on app name 1 now, I want to display some kind of information, for example, just a description of what the app does. If we create that in PHP, it's just and we display it just looks like plain text. How do we format it so that it looks good? Is it and is formatted nicely on the mobile device?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's two different ways. One way to do it, like let's do this right now. Well, we got 5 minutes, but let's try. Now, you know what? We're going to run out of time. But let's take this screen, which is our. Let me go back here real fast. Let's take our local courses screen, and let's send this to a URL called, how about we just do app details, appdetails.php. I'm experimenting here. So I need to make another file called app details real fast. Let me get back where I was. We got all kinds of stuff here. So we're in files, applications. Here's our application, PHP scripts. So let's save this as app details. This is just, again, this is just one way to do it. So the app details page, I would not use JSON because that's ugly, like you just said. I would use, if you were going to use PHP to do it on your back end, this would be one way to do it. I would just create some HTML that's gorgeous. Right? So let's do this. Let's paste this here. Oops. I'm going back to that cheat sheet. So let's paste this here. Called it these are app details. I'm going to upload this. I'm going to make sure that our screen here is pointing to that one. I think it is. We'll refresh this thing. Okay, so that's cool. So we don't want, when I tap on one of those menu rows in that dynamic menu that we had, local courses is what we called it before, but I don't want to load this screen. I want to load this screen. Let's do this. Let's refresh this. So here's our dynamic menu. It's going to show the apps. Tapping one of the apps shows our generic blank screen, right? So we want to show gorgeous HTML. I would probably put a style sheet in here. I can just do it inline. I would probably put a style sheet in here in my HTML if you're going to do it in HTML. And I would style this baby pretty. You could do like body, you could do background color or background image or something like that. Background color, pick a color. I say gorgeous, I'm not a designer. But this is just one way. And you would put like font family, right? You could just style this thing as much as you want. So you would probably have icons and graphics and images. You would get the application ID out of the URL. You'd go to your database, get the app name and the icon and all that, whatever else you want. And you would output different, I got a typo, different data Anybody see where I typoed? Oh, I need a semicolon at the end here. You would output different style data in this case. You know, however you want to be gorgeous. Got a little margin there. I probably wouldn't want a margin. So margin, 0 pixels, padding 0 pixels, so I don't see any borders. Put this in a paragraph. Maybe put an underline under it. There's all kinds of ways in this strategy. You could also use a strategy where you build another Android activity and load that. Yeah, so this is just a simple, cheesy little example, but you can make it as gorgeous as you want. Just depends on what your strategy is. It's not easy, you know, to know what the best design is. So you're welcome, Niraj. That is the end of our time. It's 12:30 in California. Who knows where it is where you are? I could talk about this stuff forever and ever and ever and ever, and I do enjoy it. But it is difficult to stay on task and to kind of, you know, teach and also do something productive. And the keys are, there's always a lot of different ways to do things. No way is the right way or the wrong way. The best way is the way that works for you. And so don't be intimidated by trying new things out. There's nothing wrong with HTML in an app as long as you know why you're using it and making it beautiful and perform well. You know, you don't want to use it as a crutch just to put a web app together. That's just not a good idea. And keep your ideas coming into the forum so that we can keep having good topics like this. And I will catch you guys later. So Warren, do you have anything?
No, I don't, other than to thank everybody for joining us today, and to thank you, David, as always, for your expertise, everything that you present to us. We will get this recording posted as quickly as we can. It may take a day or so, but just keep an eye out in the forum for the time when the recording is available. As far as our next webinar, I think the next thing we'll probably do is another Q&A session. Those seem to be very helpful.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And we'll probably try to sneak that in next week sometime between the holidays, between Christmas and New Year's. So
awesome.
Keep an eye out for that.
Okay, gang. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.